I sure want to make everybody welcome here to this conference, and I hope everybody has as good a time here as I'm going to have. And I want to thank the committee here for allowing me the opportunity to have a part of this conference, to be here and to enjoy this thing. But, you know, I was trying to find Charles this afternoon, and Buttermilk carried me around for about an hour, and so I felt like I knew this guy before I ever met him. But I went up to his room, you know, and I knocked on the door, and he said hello, and I said, my name's Junior, and he said, just a minute. You know, he come on in, but, you know, he made me feel like I was at home. He made me feel like that I had known him a long time. And some of the things that my group, when I first went there, these are the things that made me feel like I was at home. And that's the way Charles made me feel in that room this afternoon, the first time I'd ever met him. But you know, when you meet somebody and they say that, my name is Junior and I'm an alcoholic, you know, somebody knows something about me. So, this, about the only thing that Charles told me was that he said, I don't have any minor vices. So, now, I'll give you Charles. I'm not Charlie. There's a brown on yellow Thunderbird. License number ZU3778. We need it moved so we can get some more seats. Please. Charlie?
My name is Charles Lindenwood. I'm an alcoholic. I sure am happy to be here. I'm happy to be anywhere. And I sure do thank you folks for asking me to come down here and look right back in the 2,250 nice clear eyeballs. I want to thank Pauline and her husband, B.S. Some of you folks might not know Buttermilk, but most folks do, being so nice to me. And Dan Harris and Elizabeth Earhart for inviting me down here, and whoever else was responsible. I want to thank Lloyd, who is your PI man, for spending so much of his time with me this afternoon. And I want to thank Toadie for that fruit. Wherever she is, I've done it, that banana. I'm what they call a low-bottom drunk. And I found out in AA that this has nothing to do with your posterior. That's altogether different thing. And I'm kind of long-winded, and my story is so long I haven't heard it all myself. And what I do, I just get up and talk until my time runs out. And sometimes my time don't run out before. Actually, what I'm trying to say is, you and me both got a job to do here tonight. And my job is to talk, and yours is to listen. And I hope you don't get through before I do. But they got me listed as being from Castleberry, Florida, and that's where I live now because I retired. But I actually come from Arkansas by request. I can go back there now. The sheriff died. And I was back there not long ago when I was talking to some of my cousins, Bart, Dart, and Fargo. And I was telling them what a hard time I'd had. You know, it's pretty rough with me. And old Fargo, he said, why, you haven't had no hard time. He said, we've got a feller that lives here, right over that ridge, that's got 48 acres of the poorest ground you ever seen in your life. And he's trying to eke out a living for a right sickly wife and 7 little old wormy kids and a right puny mule. And he said the other morning he went out and he hooked that mule to this old broke-down plow, and he started up a furrow, got about 20 feet up there, and this plow hit a root, and it jerked that mule, and he dropped dead. Broke the plow, and poor old hard luck Clyde just dropped them reins and looked up at the sky and said, "Why, Lord? Why?" And the sky just turned plumb black, except one little hole, and there's a shaft of light shone right down through that, right on old hard luck Clyde. And this booming voice come from heaven, said, "Clyde, somehow or other it just seems like you kind of tee me off." Well, this just upset old Clyde something wonderful, and he didn't know what to do. He went over to a neighbor of his there, and he told him, he said, "I don't know what to do. Even the good Lord is mad at me." This neighbor says, "Now, what you've got to do is move to town and get on welfare and straighten up." Well, he did. He moved to town, got on welfare, and checks started coming in. His wife started putting on weight, and he had all them kids wormed, and it is just looking fine for him, and the welcome wagon come and run over him. Now there's a fellow that didn't even drink. I don't know what to start off on. It just seems like there's so many aspects of my story that don't relate to nobody but me. And then every time I talk to somebody, I find out that me and them have had exactly the same kind of troubles, because I was trying to escape from the same kind of things that you was trying to escape from. And I got arrested. I've got total recall on getting arrested. I never have learned to like policemen. By the way, I'm getting ready to tell some things here. What is the statute of limitations in Oklahoma? I remember the first time I ever got locked up in my life. See, I lived there in North Little Rock, and the police there all knew me. They'd just come up to me, and I'd be drunk, and they'd look at me and say, "I'll declare, there you are again, drunk. I don't know what in the world to do about you. Come from a fine, upstanding Christian home." Did you ever notice nearly all drunks come from a fine, upstanding Christian home? I wonder sometimes if that's a right place to raise children. But and he'd complain to me and give me this big long lecture, and finally he'd let me go, and I'd go off on some other policeman's beat to do my drinking the rest of that night. But you know, there in North Little Rock, they hired a policeman that didn't know I come from a good Christian home, didn't even know my folks, and he just grabbed me by the belt in the back there and upped me. He's choking me is what he's doing. Keep me off balance, and he went over to the box with me, took me with him, called a wagon, it come, they put me in the wagon, took me down to the jail, and put me in. They opened that big iron door, put me behind it, closed it, and I'm on this side of the door, and them policemen out on the other side. And I was thinking, I believe they got me locked up. And then it dawned on me, if I couldn't get out, they couldn't get in. And I seized upon this opportunity to tell them exactly what I thought, which I did in no uncertain terms. I referred to their ancestry, and loud. Oh, I was loud. And you know how it is when you're just nice and drunk, how loud you can be. But as time wore on, I got quieter and quieter, and finally I come up with something like, "Officer, what am I charged with? Can I please have some water?" And nobody come to see about me. And I got to thinking. I was awful for thinking. And I got to rehearsing what I was going to say to the judge. And then what he'd say to me. And if he didn't say that, and he said this, then I'd say that. That's called your alternate plan. And I remember all night long this went on, and I'm rehearsing. And I remember once there, I stood up this straight and said, "I've got to get out of here. I've got responsibilities. I've got to go to work." I hadn't worked in 3 years. And finally come dawn, and they come and got me and took me over in the anteroom, and after what seemed an eternity, they called my name, Charles Lindenwood. I went out, stood before the judge. It's like the wind was blowing up my pants legs. My leg was shaking so. And both eyes trying to get in the same socket. And that judge said, "You're charged with being drunk." And I said, "Guilty," and run out. Didn't even hear what he gave me. And he gave me, I asked one of them other prisoners, I said, "What did he give me?" He said, 10 or 10. I said, 10 what or 10 what? He said, "If you ain't got $10, you're going to find out, and you'll have to do 10 days. Well, they let me use the phone, and I called up the grocery man that we was buying groceries from on a credit. And I said, "Mr. Rice, inadvertently." Did you ever start out that way? There ain't no such thing as getting arrested inadvertently. But I said, inadvertently, they have arrested me, and it'll cost $10 to get me out. Would you please bring it down and charge it? Which he did. But by this time, I'd moved back home with my mother, and I charged it on her bill. She took a dim view of that. It didn't go over so good. But I remember on the way down, the ladder down, what I'm doing is looking into my rear view mirror. And as I look into my rear view mirror, I see you. I'm what they call a low-bottom drunk, and a lot of you folks never have been in jail. A lot of you folks never have been in a nut house. A lot of you folks never have been divorced. A lot of you folks never have done a whole lot of the things that I've done, ridden freight trains and been in flop houses and this sort of thing. But if you're still drinking, just be patient. Because there's no way to escape that next rung down on your ladder of life. You're standing on one of the rungs of your ladder of life. And I was no different to everybody else. I had my social drinking period, lasted about 30 minutes. That's right. I was hunting. I was 16 years old, and I was hunting. Never had drank any White Lightning. During the bootleg days, we was poor. Oh, everybody's poor. during the Depression, but my family overdone it. That's a fact. We're so poor, we actually didn't have enough cover. And on cold nights, we'd just pull up another dog. And some nights, I have seen a 3-dog night. But there must be a lot of folks from Arkansas here. Good to have you. And you know, I ain't used to folks loving me that much. I really ain't. You know, it's so good to be with a group of people that you know have accepted you. It's so good to be able to face folks and see a smile on everybody's face, a bright, nice, clean smile, especially a poor boy like me, come from nowhere. And I ain't fooling you about being so poor like that. And I was out there hunting something to eat. Us folks had ate up everything around to eat, and I had this old shotgun, and I was out in the swamps there, and run across this bootlegger. And he is cooking off a batch, and that worm was a dripping. Drip, 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 that thump kid. And I never had seen a still before, never had drank no whiskey before. And he hollered at me, "Hey, boy, come over here. Got something for you." Well, hell, anything is free, I took, you know. And I went over there, and he had one of these jailhouse cups, about a pint, a little better, tin cup. And he said, "Try this, still warm. Is that Arkansas White Lightning." I just took it and chug-a-lugged it. Lord, I thought I'd never breathe again. And he was a-beating on my back, and I'm turning all kinds of different colors. And finally I got my breath back and sort of simmered down a little, and he looked at me and he says, "Try her again. She's got a little age on her." Well, now, 30 minutes from that first drink, I had shot his mule and stole a Dominica rooster, and he is a-running me across the swamp, and my social drinking was over. That's the end of it. And I went home, I got home before I passed out in the backyard where we raised chickens. Now, I don't know if any of y'all ever passed out in a chicken lot or not. But you're a mess. We raised them Rhode Island Reds. They are squirters. And my mother come out there in the backyard and found me, and she never had seen me looking like that before. In fact, she never had seen nobody looking like that before. And she took me in the house and gave me the only therapy she knew, a hot bath and a dose of castor oil and an enema. I was the cleanest drunk in Arkansas, inside and out. And if I'd have had any sense at all, I'd have quit drinking right there. But you know, I couldn't remember any of that except how tall I was and how smart and plumb pretty. And that's the way alcohol affected me. It just seemed like that about a pint of that White Lightning was all the education a man ever needed. And I continued to drink, and I continued to do things commensurate with folks that drink. And I remember that I lost my wife You ever notice that nearly every man that stands at one of these podiums, at some time or other during his talk, he'll tell you about losing his wife? Well, I'm no exception. I lost 4 or 5 wives. And I don't know how many light housekeepers. But these things, I remember this is clear. I remember how it was. I got fired and I went home. I was waiting for the boss to call me. I knew they couldn't run that place without me. And I stayed there and waited. Oh, I was patient. I waited for years. They haven't called yet. And while I was waiting, I spent what money we had in the bank, $12. And then I started negotiations. That's when you go out with a toaster under your coat, you know, waffle iron. Then I got into higher negotiations. That's when you call up the second-hand company, the hot shop, and you say, "What are you giving for 9 by 12 rugs today? And do you need any sofas?" It was during these higher negotiations that my wife left. Took a dog with her. Oh, I missed that dog. And left me there in an empty house. Well, it wasn't exactly empty. There's me and a soggy mattress. Some of you might know how it got soggy. And bottles. Everywhere you look, there's empty bottles. Bob, you had that trouble. And actually, if you're sitting there wondering whether you're alcoholic or not, that's your criteria right there. You get them bottles in, but you couldn't get them out. And you'd look at them, wonder, who's drinking all this whiskey? And I used to go out. We had a park close to where I live, and I used to wait till way late at night. There wouldn't be nobody up but me and the police. And I'd take a great big sack of them empties out, way out in the... You think I'd just set them down and walk off? No, I'd sow them like seeds. Well, I drank up that house, and then the last thing that I possessed in the world was an old car. It was the drunkest car in Arkansas, I guess. It had knots all over it, even on the roof. And I was sober for a long time before I found out how them bumps and dents got on that roof. I used to run through the woods and bounce under them low limbs. And that's how they got on. I didn't exactly sell that car. The bootlegger that I bought my home brew from told me one night, he said, "Charlie," says, "go ahead now." By this time I was rooming in my car. You ever room in your car? There ain't nothing in there but you and a salt shaker. And a razor and a half a bar of soap you got out of a filling station. And he said, "You just go ahead now and use your car and drink your beer, and I'll keep tab and let you know." Well, one night I'm drinking a brew, and he said, "Guess what?" I said, "What?" He said, "You just drunk up your car." Well, I went back home to Mother's. Her drunken son come home. You can imagine how delighted she was. I moved in, and did you ever get to the point in your drinking where they'd let you stay home, but they wouldn't let you carry a key to the front door? And you have to knock to get in your own house? And I used to go up late and just be nice and drunk. And feeling just right, knock on the door, some member of the family would come, open it, this a nose. Now, all my folks got big noses, every one of them. And just open it a nose and say, yes. And I'd say, what the hell do you mean, yes? I live here. Yes, but you're drunk. Well, certainly I'm drunk. If I ain't drunk, I've wasted a lot of money on whiskey. Now let me in the house. And go on in and go back to your little room. Back in the back, slam the door and mumble. And then, did you ever think now about this point? You're sitting back there, back in this little room, mumbling, wishing to God that you could go out and tell those people you loved them, because you wanted to be with them. You didn't want to be separated from them, and you didn't know how in the world to open that door and go out and say a word. You knew that they was going to talk to you about your drinking, and you knew that there's something wrong with your drinking. You knew that the way you were living wasn't right, and you didn't know you were an alcoholic. You didn't know you had a disease. You didn't know that your family was affected by this disease. And they'd get everybody under the sun to come in and talk to you that they could. Preachers, rabbis, the postman, anybody in the world. And them preachers, bless their hearts, you'd hear mumbling out in the other part of the house, and you'd listen, you know. You'd think, now who's she got out there now? And finally, the door would open and this head would come in. Be this preacher's. They all have teeth, every one of them. And they'd be smiling. And that head with all them teeth, and they'd say, you're Charles, ain't you? And I'd think, now I wonder who else they'd expect to be in here. But you'd hear your mother say outside, well, it's in there. And that's when you become a it. And this preacher would come in and say, may I come in? And he'd be sitting there looking at you, thinking, what in the world can I say to this poor, red-faced, stinking thing? And I'd be thinking, too, wonder has he got a drink? And he'd talk about, every one of them and say, I'm going to pray for your soul. And it didn't drink. and just before they'd leave, the last thing they'd say before they left, they'd say, well, I'm a-going now. I want you to come to see me. And there's hoping in the Christ you wouldn't. I know, 'cause I went. And you'd go in there, you know, and you'd tell this lady out in the little outside office, you'd say, how do? I'm Charlie Lindenwood. The preacher said, come see him. And she'd say, who? And then she'd go into the preacher's office, and you'd hear her say, there's a feller out here, funny-looking feller, that wants to see you, says his name's Charlie somebody. And he'd say, who? And then finally he'd say, well, send him in, and you'd go in and look at him, and he'd look at you, and then you'd see he didn't recognize you. Drunks look different with their clothes on. And then you'd ask him for $2, which you wouldn't get, unless there's somebody listening. You see, you've got to learn to use your nuisance value. I got on the bum, and I got to be a joiner. The way you do that, you go to these little churches and sit right in the front row, amongst the incurables. And You sit there, and this preacher's laying it on them, you know, and you're nodding. Yes, amen, brother. Pretty soon he ain't talking to nobody but just you and him. And he's talking, amen, brother, amen, brother. And finally, he gives that altar call. Won't you come? Won't you come? You come. It's not you, not you. But Lord, you get up there and you take that nose dive, and I did that so much. I've been sprinkled, dipped, ducked, and one year I did it so much I got waterlogged. And you get up there and the congregation would fight. You know how they come shake hands with a new member? Ah, bless you, brother. You'd be thinking they worth a quarter. Here come 50 cents. And then the congregation would be around, and you'd turn to the preacher. Reverend, I've been a sinner all my life, but your sermon today touched me. Now I'm going to touch you. If you could see your way clear to let me have about $2, well, he's got to make that flank movement, because the whole congregation is there nodding. You know. He done been dishing out all that sweetness and light. But the only trouble with this is you've got to move on. It's hard to make a living that way. I don't advise it. But I'm down another rung on my ladder of life. I'd like to explain to you about these ladders of life. If you're the chairman of a board in some big company, your ladder is a great long thing, and it's way up in the clouds, way up in the ethereal. And little folks can't even see up there what you're doing. And you can make all kinds of mistakes and run up and down that ladder and do this, that, and the other, but it don't show. Your church dues are paid, and your lodge membership is all kept up. Your children are still going to school, well fed and clothed. And you're respected in your community. And then there's folks that got little shorter ladders. I mean, folks like salesmen and bricklayers and carpenters and school teachers, housewives, the tax-paying type of folks, the Democrats. And then there's folks that have got a little shorter ladder than that. It ain't got too many rungs on it. And these folks just about to be bankrupt. And they're drinking shows. Their children's shoes are not too good. And their lodge dues are in the arrears. The church dues are not paid up. And they don't look so good. They're pretty bleary-eyed, and everybody knows there's something wrong. And then there's folks that have lost their homes, and they've been fired from their jobs. They got shorter ladders still. And then there's folks like me. I had the shortest little old ladder you ever seen in your life, and it was sitting in a hole. As a result, the very first time I ever took a drink in my life, I got drunk, and I went on down from there. Now, I ain't supposed to talk too long, and I want to get to the part of what happened. Well, I come from Arkansas by request, and when I was requested to leave, I went out west, and I got out on the west coast, and got Lincoln Heights out there, and they sicked me on a psychiatrist. The first one I ever seen. And he worked with me for a while till I just plumb give up on him. And finally he said to me one day, "Boy, there ain't but two things for a feller like you to do. One of them, you can go on back to Arkansas where you won't be noticed. Or you can go to Washington, D.C. where you will be appreciated." So the ones that were near you couldn't hear you cry. And you wanted to walk out and embrace the ones you loved. And you were just as far away, you were just as lonely, and just as hungry for love as I was. every one of you, every man and woman and child. We all understand. Our common denominators are whiskey and fear and hunger and loneliness and that deep, dark, mysterious, empty feeling that prevails when we pray to God to die. And you've done this. I remember an occasion when I said to myself, well, I've got drunk at 'em so much and it hasn't helped. I believe I'll kill myself at 'em. See how that'll work. And I went and got me a pint of whiskey and took it in the throne room, and I closed the door and I put paper in all the cracks, even the keyhole, so no gas could escape. And I put both lids down on the throne. I didn't want to drown. And I sat there and I turned that gas on. And I'm sipping on this jug. And I'm listening to the gas escape. And I'm thinking about the funeral. And how nice I'll look. Laid out. And then I got to thinking about the folks that would come by to pay their respects. And they'd look down into the casket. Don't he look nice? Since he's quit drinking. And then I got to thinking about who all would be there. Couldn't think of a damn soul. And I shook my bottle and I was running out of whiskey and I was getting a headache. And that was intolerable. And it didn't look like anybody was going to come in to see about me. And I said, to hell with this. Looks like it'll be too permanent. And I got up, turned that gas off, raised the window, and pulled all of this paper out of them cracks and flushed it down the commode and went in the other part of the house and made an announcement. I said, don't anybody in this house ever have to go to the toilet. Well, a man could lay in there and die, and nobody'd know it. I was down another rung on my ladder of life. Well, you know how it is. I'll give you a little. Now, I'm going to talk to you now about the day that I was brought to AA in Washington, D.C. And I looked like the wrath of God, and I was sick, something wonderful. And I had on relievers for shoes, no socks, and I had discarded my underwear for obvious reasons. And I had on my ventilated trousers, and I was rooming in my overcoat. And I had climbed over a fence, and I was down to 2 teeth. And they didn't match. There's one of them up here and one down here. And I had to honker my jaw to make them fit. And love green onions. I don't know if you've ever tried to eat a green onion or not with this 2 teeth. But I had climbed over this fence, and I was pulling them up and eat. Where you eat a green onion with this 2 teeth is you take him and you spear him. Like that. That splits him right down the middle. And then you give him a quarter turn. And you spear him again. It gives you 4 little prongs. And you know how impatient and impetuous alcoholics are. Then you go after him in earnest. Like that. Well, you wind up with a little thing look like a broom. And you gum him. Get that juice. That's good. And I look out the corner of my mouth, corner of my eye. I was mixed up, I'll tell you. I look out the corner of my eye, and there was a policeman watching me. And I wondered, is he going to arrest me? I think he's wondering the same thing. Because he gave me that crooked finger movement. Well, I went over. I had an onion split and one ready. And I walked over to him and looked at him and said, "Yeah?" And he looked at me a long time, and finally he said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "I'm eating onions. I like onions. Is it against the law in the nation's capital to eat onions?" He said, "No, it ain't. But seems to me like if you're going to graze, you're going out in the country." Well, Lord, he shook me up. I went up to the flop house where I was living, if you call that living, and my bed wasn't made. Man, I'm screwed up today, I'll tell you that. My bed wasn't paid for, and I sat there on the side of that cot, and I knew I couldn't get out and steal anything, and I knew that I couldn't do no bumming because I had the bull horrors. And I thought about, by gollies, I've got something I can hawk. And I did have a leather coat that I had got from Thompson's restaurant. And I did a lot of my shopping at Thompson's. And I went and got that and took it to this hawk shop and talked this Jewish lady out of exactly the price to the penny of a fifth of whiskey, and got this fifth of whiskey and carried it up to the top of them stairs, and I was so nervous and shaky. But by the time I got that thing open, I dropped it and broke it and watched my life's blood run right out on the floor. And I gave up. I surrendered. And I sat down on the side of this cot with my head in my hands, and I said a prayer. The only prayer I could think of. I said, "Oh Lord, my God, is there no help for the widow's son?" And right then, without hesitation, a pair of black shoes walked up alongside of me under blue serge pants. And I figured it was a fuzz. I said, "Not that kind of help, Lord." I looked up, and I saw a familiar face. I saw the face of a man that I had drank with on the streets of Washington, D.C. A man that had mixed up squeezins with me. We had drank rubby-dub, pink lady, smoke. We bummed together on the street. And here was this man that I knew was my kind of drinker, and his eyes were clear, and his voice was strong. And I looked at him. I said, "Bob," I was concerned about him. I figured he's on dope. I said, "Bob, what happened to you?" He said, "Charlie, I found a group of people call themselves Alcoholics Anonymous, and they helped me get sober. Do you think you got a problem?" I said, "Yeah, I had run out of it, and that constituted a problem." He said, "Would you like to go to an AA meeting with me tonight?" I didn't want to go to no AA meeting, but he kept rattling that scratch in his pocket, was driving me crazy. I knew if I went with him, he'd spring, and I could get me a drink. I said, yes. He put me on a streetcar. I don't know if you ever rode a streetcar when you're just about on the verge of DTs or not, but Lord, he took me up to that AA meeting and set me right down in the front row, right next to one of the nicest looking little men you ever seen in your life. Just so clean that he sparkled, kind of shone. He had a problem. Me. 'Cause I had a few small lice. Small but active. And in that warm room, they needed rearranging. And I'm chasing one in up under my armpit. And this little fella just sitting there cringing, thinking you could just hear his head rolling. Good Lord, this man needs AA. And I don't want to say anything. I don't want to ask him why I don't take a bath. But I don't want to get lousy either. And then this wonderful, wonderful little man did a thing that I hope I shall always be able to look into my rearview mirror and see. This wonderful, wonderful little man. He reached in his pocket and took out his cigarette pack and said, "Have one." And I took two. Long fingernails, you know. And I offered him that extra one back, and no, you keep contaminated, you know. And then he replaced his pack of cigarettes, reached in his pocket, and took out his lighter and lit my cigarette. He considered me important enough to be kind to. He lit my cigarette and then lit his cigarette, replaced his cigarette lighter, and then he moved over a seat and put an ashtray in between us. And he said, "We'll both use this." What I have just described to you is human compassion at work. And that, my friends, is love. And that's what prevails here tonight. Love. That's what's endured for all the years that Alcoholics Anonymous has been in existence. It's endured with and for every man and woman in this room. Oh, yes, you non-alcoholics are included too, because this is a family disease. We all got it, every one of us. And some of you non-alcoholics who stuck with us through so many disastrous, traumatic experiences are to be commended way yonder over we people. I actually believe that behind every man alcoholic and every woman alcoholic in this room, there's somebody that they loved enough to want to do what God intended them to do in the first place. And that's why we're here. We're here because we're not all there. But there I am, and I'm sitting in this meeting and I don't know what they're saying. I'm fidgeting and scratching and trying to listen, and seemed like that meeting never would get over. But after the meeting was over, people came to me and they shook my hands and they said, "Come back. You men with your firm hand clasp, and you were walking with a firm step, and you looked at me with clear eyes, and you said, 'Come back,' and you smiled. And you shook my hand. You didn't try to squeeze it. You didn't hand me one of those fishy things, you know, that you grab and want to throw away. I remember you, and I wanted to emulate you. I wanted to be like you. I wanted to be the kind of men that you were. And you women, you wonderful, wonderful, wonderful girls with your lipstick on your lips. And your hair combed nice, looked beautiful. Didn't look like a bed that hadn't been made up in about a week. and you had your dresses with all the hatches battened down. No cargo was shifting. And they were trimmed. I thought, oh, God, if my mother could see me now, maybe she'd let me come back home. I went back to the flop house that night. It was a sleepless night. You know it was. And you people, having said, come back, come back, come back, kept ringing in my ears in unison with my heartbeat. Come back, come back. And I laid there on this old cot, and I thought, Charlie, you done flipped your wig. There's no whole room full of nice men and women want you to come back from anywhere to anywhere. But this persisted. Come back, come back. Long about daylight I got up, and it took till almost noon to shave. I didn't take a bath. You said easy does it. And I remember that I walked up to 1401 Rhode Island Avenue, and I got almost to the top of those stairs, that long, long flight of stairs that nearly all of us climbed in those days. And then I thought, I looked down at myself, that old overcoat that I'd been rooming in. And I didn't have a weak stomach like most alcoholics are supposed to have. I could lay on my back and puke right straight up in the air. But my reflexes were slow, and I couldn't duck it. And I was a mess. And I looked at myself and I said, nobody wants me to come back. And I turned around to walk away from you people. And this is when this voice came to me, either from within or without, but it said to me in a way that I could understand at my then present intellectual level. This thing said to me, boy, you better damn sight go up to those people, because if anybody's going to lose, it's got to be them. You haven't got anything left to lose. I bought this. I went up and I stuck my head around the corner. There's an advantage to just having one top tooth. It's fact. It's your grinning tooth. Ain't nowhere in the world you can grin at anybody with just one tooth and they don't grin back. No way. And I stuck my head in there, and there was a guy in there that had seen me in there the night before, and he pointed at me and around to these other people, and he said, there he is. There's Charlie. That's the guy I was telling you about. The son of a bitch was betting on me. Lord, I'm glad he won. You talk about sponsorship. Everybody adopted me, even those folks that came in earlier that day. Because I needed anything you had. Shoestring? Thank you. Didn't have no shoes to put them in. One fellow gave me a pair of shoes that had been laying floor in. Turned up at the end, just like that. My toes still cramps when I think about them shoes. Another fellow gave me a pair of socks. And another fellow brought me some underwear, said, put these on. Another fellow handed me a pair of pants, say, here, put these on, you won't be embarrassed. I wasn't embarrassed. I was used to it. He was embarrassed. Another fellow come up to me, and he sort of sidled up to me with the overcoat, and he said, give me that. He took my overcoat. I must have buried it. I never saw it again. And another fellow gave me a laxative. I needed that too. Actually, I think that's what hooked me in AA. I couldn't leave if I wanted to. I'm drinking that hot coffee, and shaking hands, and I'm saying, excuse me, I've got to go. And loving every minute of it. I'm being noticed. Folks are paying attention to me. And folks are talking to me and with me, not at me. Nobody's ridiculing me. Folks are saying they understand. And they told me stories about themselves. Stories that made me know that they understood. I became a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. We talk about glory. When we get through with this meeting tonight, we will pray the Lord's Prayer. And we will say, for thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory. But Lord, the glory I was getting. Folks, one man came over to me the next night, I remember so well, and I'm shaking. I could have threaded a sewing machine while it was running, if I could have got coordinated. And this guy come up to me and he said, Charlie, you're doing a wonderful job. I said, you crazy, I'm dying. He said, no, you're doing a wonderful job. He said, Charlie, you've been in AA and you haven't had a drink for 24 hours. And this makes you a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I said, do you mean that? He said, certainly I mean it. This is all any of us can stay sober, one day at a time, and you've made it, you're a member. I said, oh, thank you so much, thank you. I stayed sober a month, 30 whole days. People come by and said, Charlie, you're doing a great job. And I'm down to just a sort of a jerk, you know. Something like that. And I said, thank you. I stayed sober a whole year. And they gave me they let me lead a meeting. They baked me a cake, put a candle on it. And after the meeting was over, folks came up and shook hands with me and said, Charlie, you're doing a wonderful job. I said, I know it. and ain't it the truth? Lord, yes, we give the glory to God, but we give it to one another too. You see, we motivate one another to refuse a drink, just one more drink, until they can stay sober one more day, sometimes just one more hour, or maybe just one more minute. I fully believe that the old crooked arm treatment is one of the most wonderful things that has ever happened to us. And I believe if we ever have a new emblem, it might just be that old crooked arm. Did you ever make a 12-step call and sit down on the side of the bed where somebody was sitting there with their poor knees locked together so they wouldn't shake and their hands clasped together, and look up at you with those lonesome bloodshot eyes, their lips quivering? You couldn't keep your hands off of them, and you'd put your arm around them and tell them, I love you. We need you in AA, and bring them back and sit them down here amongst their own kind. I've done this, and so have you. I remember the first time a man come up to me in AA and said, I love you. And I looked at him and said, I'm married. You don't understand all this love at first, you know. Well, I'm still here. I had my last drink May 15th, 1945. And that's... I appreciate that. And you know what I do with that glory? I turn it right back over to God, as you and I understand Him, the God of our understanding, because it's from Him that this strength comes, the strength that's keeping you sober, and you, all of us. I'm thankful to God for sending me to you so that you could send me back to Him. God bless you.